There I am. Interesting little timer issues with the automatic scenes. I'm going to have to play around with that and get that going. Anyway, we are on air, so let's turn that sign on. Monday morning, getting rolling here. On air, there we go. So welcome. I thought I'd take it light today. It's Monday when I'm doing this live, and if you're catching us on the replay, this is kind of just it's a rehash of stuff that's already out there on the internet, but at the same time, it's got my own kind of spin on it. That's really centered around the preferences window inside Ecamm, because when you go into preferences, there's a lot there. And sometimes, hey, Mark, there's sometimes you run into things where you just don't quite know what's going on. And, you know, when they're writing the software, they have very little space to actually document what a feature does. And even then, the documentation for the features may not necessarily make a whole lot of sense to you, especially if you've never tried some of these preferences before. So, rather than, hunt and peck around, hopefully we can kind of go through some things and you'll get a better sense of what it is that's useful to play around with, and then the kinds of things you just leave them alone. I mean, there's no reason to spend any time with them. Don't get me wrong. Pretty much everything in Ecamm Preferences has a purpose, but whether or not you need to make any changes to it really depends on what you're doing. And obviously, in terms of things like what resolution your show is streaming at, your presentation, whatever you want to call it, those are the kinds of things you'll make adjustments to. But by and large, a lot of the settings are going to be just kind of standard across the board, especially once you get your hardware all set up. So let's just get into live demo mode here. And here I am. Howdy. I got multiple monitors set up here again. And let's dive in real quick and just start out with all the tabs. And some tabs I'm going to go through in a little bit more detail. And other ones I'm just not going to belabor the point because, it's self-explanatory or not that. I don't think it's that important. So let me, I'll zoom in here and we'll talk about some of these. All right. So in the general tab is something that you're going to, hello, did I lock up? There we go. That's weird. We just had a complete system lock. Huh. All right. Well, it seems like we're okay. As long as we're still out on the internet, that's all I care about. And it looks like it's still streaming at the moment. Let me see. Yep, still says we're live. So, okay. That was weird. The whole system locked up. Wouldn't be the first time. I am on Sequoia, so I'm on a beta of Ecamm and a beta of Mac OS. So nothing like living on the edge. Okay, so in the general tab, this is something where basically it's going to apply to the entire application. It's not necessarily something that you're going to goof off with. Honestly, I don't hardly ever touch this tab. And the reason being is that the default behavior that comes inside of Ecamm is kind of good. It's already there. Of course, you've got check for updates, but like anything else, there's multiple places. Obviously, Ecamm is going to check for updates when you launch. And anyway, so every time you launch the app, or within reason, every time you launch the app, it'll check for updates. So there's no real reason to keep hitting that button unless you're one of those people that a new release is coming out and you're just waiting for it to drop on the server. But even still, you can go to the file pull down menu or the Ecamm live pull down menu and then say check for updates here as well. Okay, animated reactions. These are when you get like a reaction from a comment, they'll show up as animated if you want them to be. And I just leave this on. People tend to not really abuse these, so I just leave them on. They're kind of fun when things happen during your live stream, so I leave that on. Now this is a legacy feature. I call it a legacy feature, and this is show camera switcher in the main window. So if I turn that on, you can see that this is the old camera switcher, right? And the old camera switcher was something that was overlaid. It's not broadcast on top of the screen. You can see if I go to get out of live demo mode, right? It's not there, right? But I can easily switch if I wanted to go over to this. Oh, wait, can I do that here? Oh, it's just letting me switch over here. I'd have to, we'll just leave it at that. You can switch the cameras here. I'm not going to get into these particular settings, but you can if you wanted to. Morning, George. You can make those changes happen at the camera switcher. But I got to be honest with you guys. Once, and like what I covered last week was the Stream Deck settings. I don't find that I need to use the old camera switcher anymore. You do all of your camera switching on the Stream Deck, or if you really want to, you can go to the camera switcher, the old camera switcher, and you can use that. But other than that, I mean, come on, it's like it's almost redundant. So I just turn that off. That one I do turn off. The program window. Now, program window is a different window. This is actually, it's on another screen right now. I'm looking at it, but here it is, right? And I run this program window inside of my teleprompter. I'm not using like Elgato's prompter. I have the old school style where an iPad is projecting onto a mirror and I've got the camera behind it. But I run the program so that I kind of align my face with the lens of the camera, and that's how I set up my program. And so it's kind of weird. It's like you're always talking to yourself, but that's what they call a confidence monitor, which I guess is good because, if you got something on your face or your hair's all whack, you can see it real quick and make adjustments as necessary. So I keep the program window up. I do use an app called Moom, and it is right here in my pull down. And this allows me, it does a lot of stuff actually, but Moon is what a lot of the Ecamm users, the user community uses. I use it because it takes a snapshot of the layout of my windows. For some reason, Ecamm in all its glory cannot remember where windows are. I don't know why, but Moon seems to do it. And so I will lay out everything like I like it, and then I'll hit, I'll basically save the window layout as a snapshot, and then I name it whatever I want, and then I can always switch back to it. And then it positions things exactly where I remembered it. So that, so I don't want to get too far off on a tangent, but if you haven't looked into this yet, Moom is the MOOM. Interesting. Sometimes I think people come up with software names just because that's the last URL that was available that was acceptable to them. The .com days were funny as hell. When people were naming their companies and they're like, oh, we're out of that their domain's gone now all of a sudden. Okay, so let's go back to the preferences window here. Let's see. Everything else I tend to, and by the way, if you guys have any questions during this, just stop me while we're in the process of talking about it. I don't mind going back, but there's not a ton of people on, and this is something that I can pause real quick and talk about a particular clicky item. This one, the automatic overlay alignment. Now this is something where it's there's an option key. Like if you hold down the command key while you're moving stuff around in the main window, that's the main takeaway for me on this is, let me see if I can find a file to drag in here real quick. And let's see. This is why you prepare ahead of time, but I'll find something. Okay, so yeah, it's going to look well here. I used this last week. I'll use it again. So if I drag this guy in, right, and you see how it's got the guides that show up when it's highlighted. Also, sometimes when you have this border, if you move your cursor off, you see that border disappear. It's still there. You just have to move your cursor. It doesn't happen along the edges. And I don't know why. It just doesn't. So if you move your cursor over, it's not gonna show up. But here's the fun part. I'm using my scroll wheel, by the way, to resize this. If I move my cursor to the corner, it highlights the border again. It's only at the corners that it does that. So if you're trying to resize something and you want to resize it, using the guides, you're going to have to grab hold of one of these corners to be able to do that. Now, let's see here. Yeah, you can see right here. This is where it pops up. So Ecamm will give you right here, what it's giving me is an edge snap and then a horizontal center snap. So this means that the icon itself will appear in, left aligned with some margin. I mean, you can take it all the way to the edge. This isn't like broadcast, like the good old days of broadcast where you had to worry about the safe area, the video safe area. This is, you pretty much get away with taking things all the way to the edge. But if you're trying to leave a little bit of a margin all the way around, that's what these guides will do. There's really no way to snap it with more granularity than that. But if I did want to turn that off, for instance, I'm holding down the command key now, and none of those snaps are appearing. As soon as I release the command key, there goes the center snap for vertical, and horizontal should be somewhere. Come on. I think I am pushing some limits here on my computer because it is bogging down. Let's see. Hang on one second, guys. Let's check my, this is a habit of mine. Oh yeah. Okay. So I can see what's going on here. This is a habit of mine. So I talk about this all the time. A lot of people, this is the activity monitor that comes with Mac OS. I do not know why my memory usage shot up right there, but that's probably why the computer paused. Notice that it's working fine now. I do not bother with the CPU tab. The Mac, the M series, here, move this guy off to the side. Right, the M series does really well with CPU utilization. But where it starts to barf is when you start running out of physical memory. You can see here, I am using, right now I'm at 11 gigs of my 16, and I'm using, or I had been using some swap space. Now that swap space will eventually go down over time, but you got to try and keep that reduced as much as possible. This is the critical tab inside Activity Monitor that you want to keep an eye on during your live stream. If you notice any kind of funkiness, like what I'm seeing, this locking up is not a behavior that I'm used to seeing. This could be a Mac OS level issue. I'm not really sure, but if it happens again, I'll just start closing. Matter of fact, you know what? This is just a good thing to do is just shut down apps that are either a distraction or not necessary. So for instance, I've got Safari and Chrome running. Why do I need that? Not during a live stream. Okay. I like to keep one of my browser windows open. Okay, so my memory usage, has gone down a little bit. That's good. All right, so back to the snapping guides. I'm getting way off track here, and I'm only a few minutes in. Let's see, what other important ones here? Yeah, okay, so automatically hide comment overlays after 15 seconds. Now, you can plug in however many seconds you want. Some people love to have, let me turn this go live thing off. Some people love to have their comments just automatically disappear. And you do that more or less for housekeeping purposes. So you pop it up there and then it'll eventually go away. So for instance, I could, put George up there and he'll be up for 15 seconds and then it'll automatically go away. Of course, if you have your Stream Deck set up correctly, you can just say hide comment and it goes away sooner. So that's, this just gives you that. It's kind of like autopilot mode. So if you're in the midst of something and you want somebody's comments to be, or comment to be seen, it's good to keep this on. And you can always, if I wanted to, I could go back and add that comment back on, again, using the Stream Deck. I'm not even touching the comments window right now, and then I can hide it here too. So those are the three commands: add comment, hide comment, and post comment. Those are all programmed into my Stream Deck already. All right, let's go over to the account setting. This is straightforward. Log in with the email that you registered with, and this is where you can manage your billing. And then we go over to Stream. Now, this is probably the one that I would say most of us use to some degree of frequency over all the other tabs. Although with the Zoom features being added in the Ecamm, that may change, but I don't see those changing as frequently as these. The stream size, now I can't switch because I'm streaming right now. I can't switch this on or off, but or I can't change it. But you can go as high as 4K, which is 3840 by 2160. That is 4K. You can go 1440p as well, which is kind of like double your 1080p, but it's ultimately the platform that you're delivering to is where you should be focusing your resolution at. So I saw this comment come up over the weekend, for instance, on Facebook. Somebody's like, I want to record at 4K, push at 4K, and then have the platforms deal with the transcoding down to a lower resolution, which is entirely feasible. For instance, if I wanted to, I could record this at 4K and push to both YouTube and Facebook at the same time. And Facebook only takes, I think Facebook takes up to 1080 nowadays, but YouTube will take 4K. So Facebook has to downsample your image, right? And so, but you're still pushing out a 4K signal. So that means that you're taxing your machine to go out at a certain resolution, a high resolution, and then the stream is delayed even further once it hits a target platform that only accepts a smaller resolution than what you're pushing out at. So it's transcoding times 2, and which means that potentially one stream could be behind the other instead of simultaneous. So I tend to, like, for instance, because I'm streaming to LinkedIn, and I don't know why, I'm just doing it because I can. With LinkedIn, I haven't had anybody ever viewing on LinkedIn before, but LinkedIn only takes 1080. You can't send it another resolution. It only takes up to 1080. You can't send it another resolution and it'll transcode down. Ecamm will prevent you from doing that if LinkedIn is your destination. It will not transcode separately to LinkedIn if you're going at a higher resolution. So that's why I'm just doing 1080 out. So this also is it's called stream size, but in reality, what it is the recording resolution. So even if you're not streaming, if you're recording to your hard drive, this is the max resolution that you will record at. The shape is obviously the aspect ratio. You can go, if you want to, like Neil, I know, likes to go to, what is he doing? Like 235:1, which is kind of like Panavision cinema wide. He likes that. And I think it's kind of cool looking. It just means that your field of view is like this, right? And not a lot of monitors are set up that way. So you're always going to have black bars above and below. The frame rate, 30 frames a second for what I'm doing right now, in anything that involves just talking heads, that kind of stuff, and most motion, 30 frames a second is enough. I mean, you could even argue for the case of being 24 frames a second. I tend to keep it at 30 just because that seems to be the acceptable standard. It introduces enough motion blur to look convincing on video. But if you go to 60, there's two things. First thing is you're doubling the data going through your stream for no reason. If it's just like this, like a talking head type thing, or you've got like your text on screen, there's absolutely zero reason to have you streaming at anything higher than 30 frames a second. Then the other thing is that it's going to look weird. If you're not streaming like live action video type stuff where you're, sports, that kind of thing, fast motion, where you want to capture as many frames as possible, then you could stream at 60 frames a second. But 60 frames a second for talking head and product demonstrations and presentations is overkill. And you're flooding your internet connection up for no reason. So I wouldn't even bother with it. Trust me, when I got set up for the first time, one of the things that I did is I made sure I could get a 4K camera that could do 120 frames a second, which is great outside of the studio. Inside the studio, when I'm live streaming, 1080/30 is more than enough for nearly every person out there. 4K is great, and 4K looks really nice. And so I wouldn't say don't do 4K. Just keep in mind that 4K is going to be 4x 1080 in terms of bit rate, data rate, and it's going to tax your upstream connection. So keep that in mind. Let's see. Use high quality video. I don't understand why you would never use high quality video mode. Why would you turn that off? But for some reason, if you wanted to, you could. Okay, it says it may be automatically deactivated if it can't stream video fast enough. That to me seems like that's yeah, you have your source level, right? You have your Ecamm source level stream, and then you've got the actual platform that you're streaming to. So it'll get chunky, but that's usually the platform will handle that. Hopefully Ecamm doesn't have to do that for you too much. The other thing is, don't turn off the use high quality audio mode. It's just bad audio is bad, and it makes bad audio makes good video unwatchable. It's just the way it is. So if you leave that checked on, everything else should be, per stream basis, right? The required speed, this little section down here at the bottom, required speed, it's pretty self-explanatory, but if you're trying to get a sense for how many destinations you're going to go to and how much upstream bandwidth that's going to take, remember the distribution of your content to your audience is handled by the platform itself. You're just sending to the platform. So even though I'm sending to LinkedIn, YouTube, and Facebook right now, if multiple people log in YouTube and multiple people on Facebook, I'm not having to worry about how many people are connecting to the stream on those platforms. I'm just worried about getting the content to the platform. So 3 destinations, you can go up to 10. Gosh, if you could stream to 10 destinations, I don't even know if there's 10 destinations worth streaming to. There may very well be 10 destinations you could stream to, but worth streaming to? And then the speed test, this is, you can download like the Blackmagic speed test. That's another one. And either way, you can see my current connection's about 230 up, and that's more than enough. I mean, even if I went to 4K, I think I would be using maybe a quarter of that, maybe. All right. Ooh, I'm way zoomed in here. Okay. The recordings tab. This is one that I want to make sure everybody who has an opportunity to ask questions about this does do this, because this is what's called ISO recording, and this allows you to record. Like, for instance, I'm not recording. I'm going to the platforms themselves, and I'm allowing the platforms to record. And yes, I understand that the local files are going to be higher quality than what ends up on the platforms. I get that. But for the purposes of this particular series, the content's going to evolve quickly anyway. So this does not have a long shelf life. So I just didn't want to take up gigabytes of hard drive space for content that's eventually going to go out of date. Certainly by the end of the year, there'll be a fair amount of this that's not going to be relevant anymore. So I turned off the recording. But normally you would say record your broadcast, and then you have your isolated video tracks underneath that. And so record is just taking the entire file as you see in the program window and recording that to your hard drive, right? And then you have up to 3 local cameras that you can record, and then your interview and Zoom guests. So when they introduced Zoom recently, Zoom guests became part of interview guests, and I just tested this over the weekend. I had a Zoom guest and an interview guest in, and I checked that on, and it did record both of them. I set the audio to just record their guest audio. So when you look at the video file by itself, it actually is just them talking. There's no incoming audio from me or from any other part of the broadcast. And why did I do that? Well, if I'm pulling all of this video into something like Final Cut Pro to do any kind of post editing, if there is a problem with one of the video or one of the audio recordings of one of the video sources, I can pull. For instance, if I like this one show, I had the 2 other people, and if somebody was echoing for some reason, I didn't hear it during the broadcast, I can completely eliminate them. So I like to isolate them, and then I use Final Cut to combine them after the fact. So this allows me to have very precise control over the audio in my recordings. And apply the camera effects to recorded video sources. So what that does, this is different from so when you are, what's the best way to describe this? When you are looking at your program window, this is the final output, right? This is what's going out to the internet. And that will be recorded, and all the camera effects that go along with it will be recorded. However, if you have this checkbox on, each individual source, if it has its own camera effects, those will be recorded as part of the source. I leave this off. And again, I do this because if I'm going to go in and do any kind of editing, if I'm isolating the video track, I'm going to edit the file later in post, and I can do all my color correction and all the stuff that you can do in camera effects, even flipping the image, sepia tone, black and white, blur, whatever. I can do all that later. So I just want the raw data. I don't care about any of the effects being applied at the Ecamm level. So for me, I leave that setting off. If you want to have it on, it's your choice. Just keep in mind that once that's baked into the file, it's there. Right? It's not, you can't pull it out. So it's much easier to put it on top later than it is to, deal with something that might be poor color correction or just something that you really wish you could take back. Well, you can't take back once it's recorded to the hard drive. Speaking of which, when you're recording to the hard drive, I have noticed even my little Mac Mini does pretty well to record like 2 guests at their full resolution, and it depends on what the guest is coming in at, but max is going to be 1080 that a guest will come in at 1080 resolution or be recorded at. And so it'll record that resolution file, but keep in mind, the more you throw at it, like for instance, if I were to check all 4 of these tracks, it would be not only the recording of the main window, but all of the tracks. And then for each guest, each interview guest and each Zoom guest is going to be recorded independently too. So you can imagine how quickly, if you have all 8 Zoom guests, for instance, they're all coming in, like you have like the pro level Zoom account, which takes up to 720. That means you're recording 8 independent 720 streams on top of your mainstream. That's just your computers. You'll find, you may not see it. And this is the part that always sucks. You may not see it during the broadcast, but when you go to play it back, there's a lot of stuttering and the frame rate, something happens, and you might be able to smooth it out, like stuck frames or duplicated frames. But again, once it's baked in, it's kind of set. So just keep that in mind. Don't throw more at your machine than it can handle. If you really want to record a lot of streams at once, I would just get like a Mac Studio with max memory, because ultimately that's what you're going to be needing is more memory. Processing power, yes, is important, but memory is important too, because it sets aside a chunk of memory. And then I then go ahead and I would have those, each independent stream would have its own like chunk of memory reserved for it. And then the machine, if you're getting like let's say you're getting 96 gigs of RAM or something like that, your chances are you're getting like, well, right now, the Mac Studio is M2. So just get an M2 Ultra, 96 gigs of memory. You'll be fine. All right, Mark has a question. Let's see here. If leaving it off and just getting raw footage, when you edit and post, can you still zoom and pan on each camera for intended framing? Yes, you can. And this is the thing, is that if you record each file, Ecamm's going to automatically record it at the maximum resolution. So it would be identical to what you would get in the mainstream anyway. The way I do this, and I talked about this in a previous live, I think it was from Friday, actually. I was talking about scenes. For instance, in the case of what you're talking about, I would have, I would do my normal presentation like I'm doing right now, and then I would create my own overlay in, say, something like Photoshop that had a transparent window, a frame around it, if you will. And I can show you what I'm talking about here. I think I have it in this scene still. Yeah, so here I've got this thing called video border, right? And if I turn that off, you can see that the little border that exists around me, that disappears. And I can see it, obviously here, but why would I turn that off? Well, if I'm recording like this, and also I would take off the logo, I would do that. So I'm just a raw video feed like this. And in which case camera A would be, what I have here, camera A would be essentially this window here, what I see here. So record all broadcasts would record all of the things that I have in here, and camera A would be this view minus the overlays and everything. So I would, in this case, what I would do for zooming and panning is that I would record to a separate file, and then inside of Final Cut or CapCut, or I haven't tried it in iMovie, but yes, I'm guessing that anytime you can bring in video and overlay it on top, you can zoom and pan. So you just want to have the max resolution possible so that you can zoom and pan without it getting too pixelated. And like I said, if you check those boxes on the isolated video tracks, it'll automatically record at the highest resolution possible for that source that's coming in. So then you just play around with zooming and panning. And I've done that before. I had a show happen this weekend, for instance, where my co-host, he was perfectly framed when we had I call it a 3-up configuration. So I had myself and him, and then we had our guest. and our guest came in on Zoom, and she was sitting at a webcam, and the way that it was framed inside of Ecamm, all you could see was basically from here up, right? So I had to go in, pan and zoom inside of Ecamm to get it to be part of the live show. But when I recorded her video separately at the same time, I have the full frame to mess with and pan and zoom around inside there. So normally what I would do is I would just create like my exact same scene. And I may have, let's see if I can pull that up, because I can show you what I'm talking about real quick. Let's go to shows. Yeah. So this, all right, here we go. So this, whoops, whoa, that's really big because I recorded this at 4K. I'm wearing the same clothes, go figure. These Tommy Bahama shirts, man, you got to take care of them during the summer. Yeah, pretty penny to wash. Okay, so you see here, he and I are framed correctly, but our guest Marcel, she's zoomed in a bit, and she's also, she's still slightly lower than us. But then if I pull in her raw video recording, there you go. That's actually what Ecamm had to work with. So, so what I'm going to do in Final Cut Pro is I'm going to isolate this part of this recording and use Final Cut Pro's upscaling to increase her resolution without losing too much detail. And there are ways to do it in AI apps and things like that. But yeah, I this is always a challenge when you're dealing with outside sources, that you're going to have something like this happen, and then you just have to work with it. And normally what I'll do is when we do the tech check, and I'm setting things up, I will try and frame things here. And I actually had a separate scene set up with just her, but she, I ended up not using that scene during the show because she was shifting around a lot, and I didn't want to pull in that scene and then have her clipped or cut off for some reason. So I was a little gun shy about that. This was an important interview too, so hopefully that helps a little bit. Obviously a course in Final Cut, doing post editing from your Ecamm recordings would be in order, and I know that there's been some of that done, but a full course or a full series, like you could probably do a week-long series just on that. Okay, so then this is new, the prompt. So what'll happen is that Ecamm will prompt you for a file name instead of just Ecamm recording blah 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 on the date and the time. It'll allow you to give it a name, still with the date and the time on it. So it's just changing Ecamm recording, I call it the prefix of the file, to whatever you have, but it's numbered still based on the day and time that you recorded it. So let's say, for instance, you're creating an episode and you are doing multiple recordings. Each time you start a new recording, it could have that episode's name in it as part of the custom file name, but it's going to change each time you hit that start-stop button. The appending portion of that file name will be the date and time that you recorded it. Let's see here. Record only count. I don't use that. I always get caught off guard with that, the record only countdown. I understand why you use it. And what it means is if you're doing takes and you need to kind of get yourself all prepped up before it starts recording, it'll do a countdown for you. I'm the kind of person, it's like I go when I'm, It's like Maverick said, I'll fire when I'm good and ready. It's like I'll record when I'm good and ready, and I'll just clip off the parts that I don't need in Final Cut. So you can leave that on or turn it off. It's up to you. That's something. It's more of a personal preference than anything. Maybe that's why it's in preferences. The choose the recordings folder. Now this one, when I select it, I've got. Right now I'm recording, well, I'm not recording at all, but if I were recording, I would be recording into this folder. I have each of the different shows that I do recording into different folders. And so this setting, actually most of the settings in preferences are profile specific, meaning once you load that profile in, it's going to remember the last recording destination that you plugged in for that profile. So for instance, if I'm doing this, where it's the Basecamp series, and I've got all of my stuff, I've got I've got the like and subscribe and the URL and all this other stuff, and this is clearly my Basecamp site. This is going to get recorded into my Basecamp folder. The Rainy Cajun podcast that I do every weekend, that one is something that goes into the Rainy Cajun folder. It just helps things keep segmented. And again, that's stored with profiles, which is good to know. Destinations, I've got a lot of these set up right now, but these are basically just places you can record to, which, by the way, seems to be shrinking. So, look, this is going to be my personal preference, and this is not something. It's not a knock on any one particular platform or another, but I've got 2 folks watching at the moment, and both are on YouTube. So why would I bother going to Facebook or LinkedIn for that matter? Matter of fact, during this entire series, this is number 6 of 10. I don't think I've ever had a single person come in on LinkedIn. So why would I set that up as a destination and take up upload bandwidth? I guess really it doesn't matter, but I just go with YouTube 90% of the time, 95% of the time, just YouTube. And even then, just keep an eye out for the destinations that you want to stream to. Again, I'm not getting into the details of every single little setting because that's been discussed ad nauseum throughout all kinds of different videos. But if you have specific questions about platforms, I do know that it was announced over the weekend that X was going to restrict streaming to verified members, basically the members that are willing to pay for their membership. So that's going to change things. And I believe that with this being an election year in the US, that there'll probably be further restrictions on live streaming for obvious reasons. They don't want their platforms getting out of hand. So Facebook's already clamped down. I think Facebook is not done clamping down on what you can stream to it. So I would just stick with YouTube. YouTube is all about video. That's what they focus on. That's where they make their money. They built their entire business model around that. Whereas Facebook and Twitter, those guys, they use video media as an additional revenue stream, but it's not their primary revenue stream. So just keep that in mind. Same thing goes with Instagram. It's like you can stream to Instagram. That's one of the options that I've done once. And for people like Stephanie Garcia, who does, she does a lot of live selling, streaming on Instagram is almost a must. But for somebody like me who doesn't do that, I don't really care about Instagram. It's not my target demographic anyway. So you also have to know who is going to be watching and why they're going to that platform versus another. So trying to pull, I can tell you this much. When we first started Rainy Cage and the podcast that I'm doing on the weekends, we started on Facebook, and I started to see the writing on the wall with the way Facebook was clamping down on things. So we were trying to move our audience over to YouTube, and that's been like pulling teeth. And I have no idea why. I realize that there's some generational differences, like Facebook's considered for old people, but I don't necessarily believe that, but I do know that a vast majority of our audience did not want to make the switch over to YouTube, which I can't wrap my head around that, but that is an issue that has come up. So just know your target demographic before you isolate yourself to a particular platform. Okay, let's keep on rolling here because we're already 48 minutes in. So this is something that now Doc Rock and I don't agree on everything, but this is one area that we do agree on. And frankly, this is something that he mentions in pretty much every demo he does, and that's your default source mode as blank. Why? Why do you do that? Well, because it's like starting with a clean canvas, right? If you're creating a new scene, you're kind of building from scratch. And if every time you build a scene, there's an animation or some kind of video file playing, or there's screen sharing or something like that coming up, it's a drag. So you can pick a camera or a screen share. Camera would be your default A camera or camera A. And that's bitten me in the butt before. So I've had because my style is to start out blank and then put a camera on top of that. That's the first thing I do, is I put a camera layer on top of that. But early on, I had it set to camera. So every time I created a new scene, I had a camera that was a fixed resolution of the window, right? It was, maximized to the window, and I couldn't do anything to it. It was just fixed there. So then I put another camera on top of that. So now I'm basically taxing Ecamm times 2 because I've got 2 camera sources in the same window. Just set it to blank, lay out your stuff like you want it. That just works so much better. The transitions, cross dissolve is the default transition, and I think that works for most of us. You can cut. That's another option, or you just do a no transition. That's a cut, basically. I will sometimes go to slow cross dissolve or slower cross dissolve when, for instance, I am opening or closing a presentation. For instance, like the way this morning started, I have my rolling scenes between the outside camera view and then the main title screen. And then when I switched over to me, this live view, I had it set as a slow cross dissolve just to signal to the audience. It's very subtle, but to signal to the audience something's changing, right? And something is you should be watching now at this point. It's very, very subtle, but I think it's good to play around with that. And just keep in mind, this is the default transition. This gets applied to every new scene you create. Every scene can have its own transition inside the options pull down window, and it's transition. So you go to options, transition. Now the thing that I think some people get hung up on is that transitions, when you set it for a scene, that's the transition out of that scene, not into the scene. The outbound transition is picked up by the current scene. If that makes sense. So if I'm like in this view, for instance, and I switch over to another view and I set this scene to slow cross dissolve, it's going to go slow cross dissolve out of this scene into the next, whatever that next scene ends up being. So some people get that confused, but it works just like Keynote. The Keynote does the exact same thing if you're having a hard time wrapping your head around that. Fade out when finished. I leave this on mainly because it's another visual cue. Something's ended. Something's over. And because it's recorded with the file, it's a nice way to transition out. Then again, if you are editing in post, you can add that transition out, and that transition out, instead of it just being a fade to black, can be whatever you want. just keep in mind that if that's selected, fade out when finished, that's baked into your recording, right? So just keep that in mind. So you might want to, if you're going to leave it on, keep some time from when you're actually done talking, 2-3 seconds, right? Keep some time of just silence, you looking at the camera, and then have it fade out. And it may look a little weird live, but once you get into editing and you're doing cross transitions between scenes, it's nice to have that room to play around with, right? Autoplay video files, that's when you drag and drop a video file in. For instance, I've got this, right? I dragged this in and it just automatically started playing. Now, when you do that, that's great, but you also have to make sure that you set up, let me, I'll turn off the be right back for a second here. You can see there's some settings here, right? And the one that's the most crucial for animation is if you're doing something like this, where I just want a loop, I have a looping background, click on this little icon here, and then it says when the video ends, loop the video, right? Be careful the next two, especially the last one. This, by the way, is how you end the broadcast, and this is how I end the broadcast for this, for any time I do a series, is that I have a lead out video, or I guess it's what do you call it? A lead out, outro, whatever. And I have it set that at the end of that video, it selects end broadcast. So as soon as I go to that video and that video ends, then I've got a completed stream. I'm done. I can walk away at that point. Picture in picture above. I don't use picture in picture, guys. You know, to be honest with you, I just don't do it. I use camera overlays if I want picture in picture. I don't bother with any of this stuff. NDI and siphon titles. Yeah, I mean, you can. NDI is something that I've had success with, and I know other people have had success with. It is very specific on your network topology and the bandwidth of your network, because what you're doing is you're taking essentially what you would put through an HDMI cable up to 4K resolution, for instance, and shoving it through an Ethernet twisted pair cable. Can be done, but that network needs to be dedicated. So before you start goofing off with NDI too much, I would read up on that and whether or not it's actually necessary for you. Some cameras only work through NDI, in which case you're going to need to have this option. But in most cases, you know, we're all working with local hardware anyway. So NDI, network device interface. It's something by a company called NewTek, a former competitor of mine, actually, when I was in the Autodesk days. Disable the built-in camera. Yes, do this. Turn this on. Turn this on. Your FaceTime HD camera ain't going to cut it. So just turn this on, especially if you got a laptop. You got a MacBook Pro. I don't care if you got one of the new M3 ones. Turn that crap off. Get yourself a real camera. The thing that's built into the Mac sucks. I'm sorry, it sucks. I don't understand why Apple can build all this great hardware and they still build. I mean, if they can put nice cameras into this, why can't they put nice cameras into their laptop, which is theoretically a thicker? I mean, I'd even take bumps, right? You know, like they have on the back of the iPhone, the little camera bumps, to get a better camera quality than what comes through. So just turn that off. That way it doesn't show up in your camera pull down menu here. I don't even bother with Skype. I haven't touched Skype in at least a decade, so I wouldn't worry about that. Audio tab. This is a bit of a mixed bag in terms of things that we could go through. I will say this: 90% of your audio problems are going to be solved through this box, because people always say Ecamm's echoing. Well, it's not Ecamm that's echoing. It's the hardware, the way the hardware is configured. So obviously you can see here I'm using the Rodecaster 2 Rodecaster Pro 2. I've got my Rodecaster configured for how I want my audio to go on my show. This is something that can get, again, like the Final Cut series, there could be a whole series on just setting up audio, because it's a little bit of a black box, right? I mean, when you think about it, it's like there is, with camera equipment and graphics, stuff that appears on screen, you can see it. But with audio, it's like all of a sudden you turn something on and you just hear what echo, which is technically called slapback in almost all cases for what we're talking about here. It's all of a sudden it's Ecamm's fault, and it's usually not. It's the way things are configured. So the one thing that I would definitely play around with, though, is the mic delay feature. So, for instance, the way I've got the audio set up now, the microphone is going into the Rodecaster Pro, which is then connected to the Mac Mini. The camera is connected to a Elgato Camlink 4K, and that is then connected into the Mac Mini. And there's about, I've got a 3-frame difference between the two. And I could probably tweak that further. But this is where, if somebody says, well, your audio doesn't match up with your video, it's usually here under your mic delay where there's a problem. So there's a website. You can go here. I'm going to type it in real quick. There's a website, Squares TV. And I know you're supposed to do the HTTP thing, but that Michael Forrest has put together a little way to set up your timing so that you can adjust how many frames you need to. It'll basically give you an indicator of how many frames. But the quickest way to do it is record something, clap, right? Just clap like 1, 2, 3, right by your microphone, and watch that recording. And if your hands are meeting before the sound of the clap, then you need to put in an audio delay one way or another, right? Versus like if you hear the clap and they're still coming together, those are the kinds of things that you need to adjust. And that's where it's done here. One thing, system audio, you know what? Because I have a Rodecaster Pro, the system audio comes in on a separate channel, and I just drag that all the way down to 0. And because, as much as I try to remember, I forget to turn on like silence, like do not disturb mode. And ultimately what ends up happening is you will hear my little text message dings and new emails and that kind of stuff. So I ended up putting all that audio on a separate channel that's on USB 1. And that keeps it from showing up, or not showing up, but it keeps it from something that you hear. If I turned it on, you would hear everything else that was going on my computer. And that's why I've got my Rodecaster Pro 2 as my chat, but that's also my audio in source too. Let's see, interview mode. I leave all this set to on. Oh, I'm sorry. I do set the guest view to broadcast. And the reason why it depends, I don't know what the default is. I think it's broadcast, but broadcast is where you're going to, they're going to see the entire show, as it were, when they log in. And generally speaking, you want that, especially if you have multiple guests. You want them to be able to see the other guests. So I tend to just leave it on broadcast, and whatever's going out for everybody else to see, your guests will see too. I don't send them to the green room. They just come in, and then I load them into the scene when I want to. So I don't do the green room, and I do the ring chime. You can, it's, if you turn off the ring chime, just be watching. If you're expecting somebody, just be watching to see if they've dialed in or not. And then auto answer. So this one is pretty straightforward. I leave auto answer on because if I'm in the middle of a show and somebody calls, it just answers, picks up, and I have control of when or if they even come into the broadcast. And then let's see, screen sharing. There's anything here that's worth talking about? Nope, these are all self-explanatory, but you do have a separate tab for screen sharing. I do like to include the mouse cursor. You can set that mouse size to, yeah, I love it, normal and gigantic. I don't think gigantic follows the Apple user interface guidelines for naming, but you know, Ken and Glenn can have a little fun sometimes, just like they have the under the general here, the overlay alignment, sticky versus snappy. It's like, all right. Let's see here. So I include the mouse cursor, and let's see, show everything. Yes, I show everything when sharing the entire screen. I figure you can, for instance, actually I can do this because I'm kind of getting close to the end anyway. I found another free clip, so I will go to my screen sharing here. And this is this week's free clip from Pond 5. This is just it's a very short video, but I was talking about this last week. And let me copy that URL. I'm just going to paste it into the chat here. And if you're interested in downloading this for free, you can. They have a 4K resolution. For me, I don't know why but this is highly applicable for my Cajun podcast. But you know, you may not need it, but it's free. It's a free clip. So Pond 5 has these every week. They publish a new free clip every week. And so here I am screen sharing my Chrome window. That go back to what we're talking about. And you can see if I click the icon here, I choose Google Chrome as my screen share, even though I've got a lot going on that screen other than Chrome. All you see is the Chrome window, and that's how I do it. Let's see, let's go to shortcuts. Go back to moi. Oh, shortcuts. You know what? I had these set up. They're broken in Sequoia, so I turned them off. But I created shortcuts. For instance, the on-air sign that's behind me, that's on a remote-controlled outlet. And that outlet is something that can be addressed in the home app of iOS or Mac OS. And so whenever I went live, the on-air sign would go on, and that would be when broadcast starts, I would have it go to, start show. That was my script. And then when I was done, I would tell it when the broadcast finishes, I would say end show. And then inside that shortcut script would be shutting off that on-air light. It just kind of speed things along, you know. Shortcut programming is not that hard. It's way easier than even Apple script. So if you're interested in making things a little bit faster on your system, when you're doing things, the shortcuts are great for that. Remote control. These are remote control by other apps of Ecamm. So for instance, you can see I've got the Elgato Stream Deck here, and I've also got Ecamm Presenter, which I hope to do a presentation of at some point very soon. But the Stream Deck is obviously what I'm using to control my scenes right now. So this is these items just show up. If you want to disable it for some reason, if you're having problems with it, just uncheck it. That'll disable it. And I know Elgato, sometimes they push out updates that just wreak havoc on the system, and I don't know. I don't want to get off on that tangent. Okay, last tab. This is a new tab when they integrated Zoom. And this is something that you really, unless you're familiar with Zoom or you're doing Zoom presentations, this tab will apply to you only if you're utilizing the Zoom functionality. This has some features that are similar to the interview tab, like the auto admit. It'll automatically bring people on. Now, if you have a select group of people that have the link to your Zoom call, I would just turn auto admit on, and then that way they just show up, and then you can add them to your scene as needed. But if you have like a multi-person, George, I do have on the Basecamp website, there's a video of how I did that on-air sign. So, and how I did the shortcuts for that. So you can take a look at that. I forget the name of it, but I think it was like Studio Automation or something along those along those lines. Excuse me. Let's see. Zoom capture mode. Yeah. We just want it on live streaming. This is what happens, what your audience will see when they log in. Because Ecamm is capturing the Zoom source, it's going to show the audience that it's either being live streamed, even if it's not, or it's being recorded. So I just leave it set to live stream. That way people aren't freaking out like, oh, you're recording this. It's like, no, I mean, I am, but I'm using Ecamm's recording features. So show Zoom guest names. This just appeared as a new feature as of, so this is the 27th of June. This will show people's names inside of your Ecamm presentation. It has the functionality, I think, is limited right now, so I wouldn't just put your own names in there for the moment. I really would love to see something where Ecamm puts a feature in where you can create a name block, like a text block, or a variable text block, and then the variable could be username and then company or something like that. And then no matter whose face is in that overlay inside your Ecamm presentation, that the name underneath will update based on what you're doing. Because if you're going through a lot of attendees and every person has a question, you don't have to sit there and retype their name. Even if it's just one-on-one or one-on-two, that's personal preference. Let's see. The Zoom active speaker camera. This has been demonstrated. Yes, Mark, to answer your question, yes, I am planning on using those together. Michael Forrest at that squares.tv website does have a demonstration, and he does a live stream every week where he will demonstrate QCam running with Ecamm. And the plan is, yes, I want to be able to do that because it does allow you to do some fun things really quickly. You lay out your screens, and then so you have your video window here and all the little text that comes in. You just basically you focus on the text. You make a template, you focus on the text, and then it's auto-populated, and you just step through your presentation. You don't touch Ecamm really much for any of that stuff. So QCam Presenter is really good for that, and working with video pencil is really nice too. So yeah, there is a video. Michael has lots of videos on that, and then there's more of us kind of getting our feet wet with it. So I look for more content coming for that real soon. Zoom, the Zoom audio processing. Live stream light automation. Yes, that's it, George. That is definitely the one. Zoom audio processing, I disable it. Now, this doesn't affect the processing on your client's end, meaning the people that are calling in. Their processing is theirs. This affects it on your end. So, Ecamm is kind of like, in terms of audio capabilities, it's kind of like the Linux version of it. And I know that's going to make some people cringe, but you are left up to your own devices to go hog wild with it. And it can be very daunting if you start getting slap back and echo and things like that. But I leave this off, and I use Ecamm's audio settings. I do not use Zoom's audio settings as the presenter. Let the guests do what they want. And the nice thing about the guests, like again, going back to the call I did over the weekend, her settings were hers, her audio settings. So she wasn't wearing headphones. We all had in-ear monitors on, but she didn't have headphones or any of that stuff, and everything worked perfectly. Audio worked perfectly. Add the Zoom chat to Q&A questions. Yeah, you can turn that on. It's not going to be posted unless, let's say, like you've got a Zoom chat going on inside of Ecamm. You got a Zoom chat. It's not going to show up in your main broadcast window unless you click on it. So it'll have, instead of like you guys where you're coming in through YouTube, you got the little YouTube icon, there'll be a Zoom icon. That will not show up in the main stream, right? You have to click on it for it to appear. And when I say won't show up in the mainstream, it won't show up in the list like the chat box that's off to your right there. And then manual audio mode. I don't play around with this. Yeah, I just, look, if you're just getting started with Zoom, don't even play with this because this is taking things to a level where unless you're using like a Rodecaster or you're a software-based mixer where you can mix in all your stuff and you have a firm grip on or a firm understanding what it is you're doing, just don't get involved with that at the moment. And I'll goof around with that and find some use cases for it, but I think that's off by default, so I would just leave it off. Okay. My clock is up and I have to run, and thanks both you guys for showing up for the stream. I really appreciate it. I'll be covering, I have 4 more streams to go, and they're going to be 6:30 in the morning Pacific time for the remainder of the week. And I'll publish a new topic every afternoonish, eveningish for the next day's show. So just be on the lookout for that. Make sure to do the good old like and subscribe if you wouldn't mind on the Basecamp channel. And that way you'll get those updates when they're posted. So until tomorrow or next time, if you're viewing this on the replay, I will see you guys later. Cheers.